So this story that we're talking about in chapter 3 of Esther doesn't begin right here. In fact, it begins ages ago when a man named Saul was crowned the very first king of Israel. In fact, we can't actually make good sense of the entire story of Esther unless we go back to the book of 1 Samuel chapter 15, and we look at what happened to Saul, King Saul, way back 100 years before. If you're using the Pew Bible, it's on page 225. Go ahead and turn there. If you've brought your own Bibles or you're going through the church app or another app, you can look up 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 1. Samuel is a spokesperson, what we call a prophet for God. He's God's mouthpiece at the time, we might say. And in this story, Samuel's been sent to King Saul to give him some instructions about what God is asking him to do next. It's what Saul does in this story and what especially he doesn't do that we need to remember if we're going to make sense of our story in Esther. Here is what 1 Samuel 15 says. Now Samuel said to Saul, "The Lord sent me to anoint you king over his people. Now therefore listen to the words of the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, I will punish the Amalekites for what they did in opposing the Israelites when they came up out of Egypt. Now go and attack Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey." So Saul summoned the people and numbered them in Telaim, 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 soldiers of Judah. Saul came to the city of the Amalekites and lay in wait in the valley. Saul said to the Kenites, "Go, leave, withdraw from among the Amalekites, or I will destroy you with them. For you showed kindness to all the Israelites when they came up out of Egypt." So the Kenites withdrew from the Amalekites, and Saul defeated the Amalekites from Havilah as far as Shur, which is east of Egypt. He took King Agag of the Amalekites alive, but utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. Saul and the people spared Agag, and the best of the sheep and the cattle and the fatted calves and the lambs, and all that was valuable, and would not utterly destroy them. All that was despised and worthless, they utterly destroyed. So what does Saul do? Saul's supposed to wipe everything out. Everything that had to do with the Amalekites. Nothing was supposed to be left. No people, no kings, no animals, no houses, nothing. But Saul doesn't do it. He takes care of everything that the text says was despised and worth not keeping around. But he thought it was a waste to not keep the good stuff. He even thought it was a waste not to have a little fun with the king, apparently, King Agag. That's when we get to the next verse, verse 10, and we hear a disturbing word. The word of the Lord came to Samuel, verse 10 says, "I regret that I made Saul king, for he has turned back from following me and has not carried out my commands." And then if we went on to the next chapter, chapter 16, we get another guy named David who's made king in Saul's place. So what happens? Saul fails to wipe out the Amalekites, represented by their king, King Agag, and he loses his throne for it. Now flip over to Esther. And if we look at Esther chapter 3, beginning in verse 1, we'll see how all this goes together. Esther chapter 3. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the officials who were with him. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and did obeisance to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not bow down. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's command?" When they spoke to him day after day and he would not listen to them, they told Haman, in order to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or do obeisance to him, Haman was infuriated. But he thought it beneath him to kill only Mordecai. So having been told who Mordecai's people were, Haman plotted to destroy all the Jews, all the people of Mordecai throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. Now, if we're just reading chapter 3, right at the beginning here, it all seems sort of bizarre. Why would Mordecai care? Why would he even dare, actually? Hasn't he just told Esther, go, do what the king asks. Don't worry about following kosher. Don't worry about all the Jewish stuff. Don't worry about any of these weird relationships between this Gentile king and you, Esther, the Jew. Keep, in fact, your Jewishness secret from everyone. He's obviously okay with Esther, his cousin, his charge, keeping everything secret, going along with anything the king wants. And yet here, Mordecai is refusing to do something as small and really just as petty as bowing down before a pompous buffoon. You can do that and not even mean it. Who cares, Mordecai? Well, Mordecai is stubborn. There's got to be a reason, and the text gives us one. It's just not where you and I might think to look. Why do you disobey the Lord's command? His friends ask. And then we find out that Mordecai does something, or rather he says something to them that means all the world. It makes the whole difference. He told them that he was a Jew. And then the king's servants go off and report to Haman in order to see, the text says, whether Mordecai's words that he was a Jew would stand. Now, what could this mean? It's all here in the story. Last week in chapter 2, we learned something about Mordecai. We got a look into his family tree. And the text says at the beginning of chapter 2 that Mordecai is a Benjaminite. He's a descendant of King Saul. The connection is important. All right, trace his family line back. Not only is related to Israelite royalty, goes all the way back to the king, the guy who took out the Amalekites only to leave King Agag, their guy, alive. So Mordecai is a Benjaminite, just like Saul was a Benjaminite. The connection is important because guess who is an Amalekite? Haman. And he's not just any Amalekite. Haman is the son of Hammedatha, the Agite. Mordecai is the son of Saul. Haman is the son of Agag. This rivalry from way back in 1 Samuel 15 returns, and it runs deep. It's a blood feud that goes for centuries. This is the Bible's version of Romeo and Juliet. This is the Montagues and the Capulets without any of the love, but all of the hate. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or do obeisance to him, Haman was infuriated. But he thought it beneath him to kill only Mordecai. One isn't enough, he thinks. One isn't enough. I got to kill more. All right? One's not enough. I've got to kill the whole lot. So having been told who Mordecai's people were, Haman plotted to destroy all the Jews, all the people of Mordecai throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. What the Jews were supposed to do to the Amalekites way back in Saul's day, now Haman plans to do in reverse, in revenge. He's got to be licking his lips, sweet justice, years of almost being obliterated, and now the table is turned. It's an ages-old grudge that's finally coming due, and it's at the center of the plot of the book of Esther. When we hear tales like this, stories like this of genocide, especially when it comes to the Jews, it's really hard for us today not to go immediately to the final solution devised by Nazi Germany. In fact, if you want a real and rather frightening context for the book of Esther, for the story of Esther, all you really have to do is go back 80 years from today, go back to World War II, go back to the Holocaust, and ask, why does this keep happening? Esther is a story about tremendous and terrible evil, but significantly, it's also a story about how such evil often comes about. And because it's a story about that, it's especially a warning for us. Haman doesn't even see Mordecai. He has to be told that the Jew is not bowing down before him. Haman's head is just too stuck up in the air to actually notice anything going on around him. He's supposed to have authority to rule over this kingdom. He has charge over it, but he can't even see the people he's ruling, the people right next to him. When he finally does, because he's forced to, he takes it as an absolute affront to his person and to his power. We've seen stuff like this already. Vashti doesn't come when Ahasuerus calls. Instead, Ahasuerus throws a fit. All right, he throws a fit. Haman has learned, it seems, from the very best, the top dog here. We could psychoanalyze this and say, well, there's a lot of fear here, but the thing that really sticks out is the way these guys, like Haman and Ahasuerus, the way that they see power and the way that they go about protecting it. With Haman, just like Ahasuerus, his power is used for power's sake. The story won't let us miss this. What is the very first thing? The very first thing we find out in chapter 3 that Haman does with this newfound authority that his king gives him. The text says that Ahasuerus advances him and puts him above all the officials in the empire. And the first thing he does is he goes out and struts. He goes out and struts. All the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and did obeisance to him. Haman doesn't use his power for good. He doesn't even use it for bad. He just struts around with it. And that's because his power is first and foremost about him. Jesus consistently pushes against us seeing power this way. When James and John, two of his disciples, come up to him on the road and they say, hey, Jesus, when we get to your kingdom, can we sit in the honor seats? Can we sit next to you at the table? Jesus looks at them and says, you have no idea what you're asking. He doesn't actually tell them off for being greedy. He doesn't tell them off for that. He doesn't say you're being vain. He doesn't say you're being selfish. He doesn't say any of that. He just says, you have no clue. You don't understand what you're asking. You don't get power. You don't understand what it means to have it. They think sitting next to Jesus in a place of honor is what it means to be in charge. It means getting people's respect. For people who have been oppressed, I can understand that. But Jesus says it's not really anything like that. Power isn't about getting to decide what people should or shouldn't do. That's what other people think is power, Jesus says. That's what the Hamans and the Ahasueruses of the world think. These guys, Jesus says, they lord it over others. They're tyrants. He uses that word. Jesus does. But real power, Jesus says, it isn't about having it, but about giving it. Real power is about empowering others. That's why Jesus finishes off this little story. You can find it in Mark chapter 10 with one of his most famous lines. He says, whoever wishes to become great among you must first be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Haman is no Jesus. He's more like Prince John in that old Disney movie, Robin Hood, the cartoon one. Do you remember Prince? This is where Robin Hood and Maid Marian are foxes, all right? And Little John is a bear, and Prince John is a like skinny little lion, right? And so Haman is the stumbling, bumbling, vain villain in this story who cares only about one thing. It's getting rid of Robin Hood, right? And not because that would help that would help anybody around him, that would help him actually take care of his people, but because it would finally allow him to sit back and relax with all his jewels and his gold. That's Prince John. This is Haman. But Haman's cartoonishness drops out in the story when we realize that he's serious about committing genocide. and he actually believes his actions are defensible. In fact, I think he's convinced himself that they might even be benevolent, kind. That at least is what he's telling to the king. Just look at verse 7. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, which means the lot, before Haman for the day and for the month. And the lot fell on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered and separated among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people. They do not keep the king's laws, so that it is not appropriate for the king to tolerate them. So if it pleases the king, let a decree be issued for their destruction. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, so that they may put it into the king's treasuries. So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. The king said to Haman, the money is given to you and the people as well to do with them as it seems good to you. There is more packed into this little paragraph than we're going to have time to deal with today, but let me point out just a couple of things. First off, we're reminded right here at the end of this paragraph that Haman truly is the enemy of the Jews. We get his whole name, and it's a long one, repeated twice in 10 verses. This is meant to make it stick in our heads. We're supposed to get the point. Haman is an Agagite. He's a Benjaminites and Israelites, their oldest enemy. The text won't let us forget this. The second thing is we see Haman has his reasons for genocide. The Jews, he says, they're scattered everywhere. They're in the perfect position to influence, to strike, and they're disloyal. We've talked a lot about how the story of Esther is a story without a God, but it's not the story without the people of God. Here in chapter 3, we learn that the Jews consistently followed their own likely religious, cultural traditions. And they did so even in the midst of being in Persia, in the midst of exile way out here. How much that translated into them actually disobeying the king's laws is another matter. But Haman doesn't seem to be one for nuances or particulars. Haman's got a grudge, and this excuse sounds reasonable to him, just as it does to Ahasuerus. If you took a look at my notes on this chapter from this week, you'd see that I couldn't get, when reading these passages about Haman, about Ahasuerus, and about how they're going about this, you'd see that I couldn't get out of my head how similar I found all this to the news we heard this past Monday coming out of the Southern Baptist Convention. David Brooks of the New York Times calls it the Southern Baptist moral meltdown. A third-party investigation uncovered decades of lying and gaslighting by the men in the highest echelons of the denomination. They downplayed and covered up years of consistent and widespread sexual abuse of women in the denomination. These are women who were abused by their own pastors and ministers in the churches that they came to receive life. Some of the abusers, we found out, were actually part of this executive committee at the top of the denomination, the ones covering it up. But here's the part that sounds especially like Haman in the story of Esther. It was discovered in hundreds of the interviews and thousands upon thousands of emails through this independent investigation that the people in power there in the SBC consistently and intentionally put the organization first. The business was prioritized as opposed to the people it was supposed to serve. The executive committee was concerned about legal liability more than caring for their own survivors of sexual abuse or even preventing that abuse from happening in the first place. And all of this was done under the guise of the gospel. They said that making a big deal about these reports of abuse, even giving them the light of the day, it would undermine the work of their evangelism. They said the convention was doing too many good things to let a little abuse ruin it all. In Esther's story, Haman argues that the Jews are the problem. There's a bunch of lawless troublemakers, he says, and they're poised to overthrow our righteous empire. The SBC Executive Committee often took a similar tack. They said all these reports of abuse should be seen for what they really are. They're a satanic scheme, they said. Those are their literal words. A satanic scheme to completely distract us from evangelism. They blamed the victims. They stopped caring for their people under the guise of caring for their people. You see power when it ceases to be power for others, when it ceases to be a power that empowers to lift up, to heal, to save. When power ceases to be power for others, it instead becomes power for me. And it quickly leads to abuse, and not just an abuse of power, but an abuse of human beings. If this sounds far removed from us sitting here on the corner of Burns and Waverly, or watching in our own homes, I imagine it seemed far removed from the SBC Executive Committee for a really long time, too. These were people who had been shaped by sermons like the one you're hearing right now. They had dedicated their lives, their time, their money, their energy to a commandment that says, love your neighbor as yourself. They were people of prayer. They read and they talked theology, and they still failed at this, egregiously so. What leads to something like this? It's what we saw in Haman, I think. David Brooks puts it this way: moral behavior, he says, doesn't start with having right beliefs. All the books of theology, years of sermons on love don't automatically lead to good behavior. You can't get that going to my office or our library here and reading everything. What does lead to good behavior? He says it's an act, the act of seeing the full humanity of other people. Moral behavior is about seeing other people with the eyes of the heart, seeing them in their full experience, suffering with their full suffering, walking with them on their path. This is the good news of Jesus in action. This is what we call the gospel being lived. It's not words. The gospel isn't really words. It's not something we can even communicate in a sermon or repeat in a tract. Not really. It's something we experience. It's something we have happen to us. It's the love of God that transforms us. That's the gospel. We receive the gospel when we receive God's transformation in our lives, life given to us. When we stop seeing other people, especially the people under our care, in our power, when we stop seeing them as children of God, we can easily find ourselves focusing on something like minimizing our legal liabilities, which is exactly what the committee did. It's also what Haman and Ahasuerus are doing. Haman had zero vision for the people under his care. Neither did Ahasuerus. Just look back at verses 8 through 11. The king was indifferent to the whole matter. It's really quite fascinating. He doesn't even ask who these people are that Haman wants to exterminate. They're like an infestation of rats to him, except he's not even sure if they're dealing with rats or with cockroaches, and he simply doesn't care. The Jews go unnamed the whole entire time. Haman never says who he's talking about. He just says a certain people. But Ahasuerus just gives permission to get rid of them anyway. Talk about not seeing the humanity of other people. The king doesn't even see his own people to begin with. All he sees is himself and his needs and his desires. When you look at the SBC situation today and what we saw years ago in the priestly abuse crisis in the Catholic Church, this seems to be something they shared. Both appear to have exerted a whole lot of energy actively trying not to see, not to know what was going on around them among the people that they cared about. What are all these folks missing? From Ahasuerus to Haman to the SBC's executive committee, what are they missing? I think it's the fact that true power, as Jesus defines it, It's all about our duty to each other. Power is our duty to others. It's what Jesus says. Power should be an expression of our duty to each other. So where does that leave us today, right here, right now? If we want to start seeing the full humanity of other people, if we want this for our society and not just for our own lives, we've got to stop thinking about society in terms of only our individualness, only our rights. We've got to start thinking about duties to each other. Unfortunately, we don't talk a lot about duties. We just don't. It's not in our language. It's not in our discourse. We don't talk about it. All of our conversations, it doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on, actually. We're always talking about rights. Protecting our rights, not infringing our rights. Rights, rights, rights. This isn't necessarily bad. But Jesus says, what's the flip side? And he says, I'm not going to focus on rights. I want to focus on duties. Our duty to each other. In fact, it's our duties to each other that Jesus says are much more important to remember than our own rights. So if we're going to talk about our moral formation, it begins with this, with flipping the script and reimagining the way we view our relationships as one about our duties to each other. This is why Jesus takes that so-called silver rule, don't do unto others as you don't want them to do unto you, which, by the way, the silver rule focuses on rights language, and he transforms it into a command about duty. Do unto others what you would have them do unto you. He calls it love your neighbor as yourself. But here's the thing, just listening to a sermon on love or reeling over an investigative report, none of that is going to change us. It's the day in and day out work of approaching our relationships to each other, a work that Scripture says is empowered. Empowered, there's that word again. Empowered by the Holy Spirit. These things aren't hopeless because God, as we read from Ephesians, empowers us. We're not alone in this world. That's why Jesus says, if I don't go, then you won't get the Spirit. We're not alone in this world. This is the point in the power of Pentecost, what we celebrate next week, but it calls us this week to wake up every morning and look at our spouses and our kids and our neighbors and the people we see on TV and ask, what is my duty for this person today? How can I treat them like the child of God that they are? And start there. If you're tired of everything we've seen and heard this week, if you want to do more than just lament and shake your head, Jesus says, flip the script. Become a people focused on duty. Focus on that. There's real power. Amen. God, we come before you this morning, hurting and in pain over what we've watched and read and heard this week. Things just keep piling up. We long for an answer, the same longing we've experienced now for decades doesn't seem to be coming. We pray for wisdom. We pray for the power to love others. Help us understand our duties, and so form a society, a world, a community, a church, a people that looks like your kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. Amen.